What's up, everybody? Wish we were coming at you with an episode that was a little less emotional, a little less dramatic, and had better news for everybody. But this is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Quite honestly, I just did not have it in me to. I didn't really know. Obviously, none of us really knew the extent of things last night. But I just for a variety of reasons did not have it in me to do a post-game show. I know you're supposed to. No excuses, play like a champion, but I couldn't do it, John Sheeran. I just couldn't do it. Not good news coming out of Bengals Nation this week, and at the end of this week here, I'm Anthony. He is John. How you coping, buddy?
Nah, it's no cope. You know, it's just another day in the office. Feels very reminiscent to what is it? Almost 3 years ago to the date. It's the same week of the season that the quarterback of the Cincinnati Bengals suffered a season-ending injury. I'm kind of glad you didn't go last night, just because, I mean, after it happened, for those who don't know what we're talking about, Joe Burrow injured his wrist, and he's out for the season with a torn ligament in his right wrist. After it happened, though, it's just a whole bunch of speculation about what it was, if it happened prior to the game, this mystery brace that was in this deleted footage, a lot of hearsay, a lot of speculation. Now there's an investigation, a lot of stuff we knew or either didn't know. So I'm kind of glad we're waiting to talk about this, because I think we have a little bit more clarity on the situation, and I think we can have a better conversation because of that. So here we are.
Yeah, that's a good point, and this is probably a detriment to my following on social media and maybe even the subscriber count that we have on this show. I've just always kind of subscribed because I followed the lead of a lot of different great beat writers and reporters and stuff that, we rely upon so heavily for information, be it about the Bengals or the NFL. But I kind of subscribe, John, to, I don't necessarily need to be first. I'd rather be correct. I'd rather have the correct information. And so that did play a part of, not going live on the post-game thing. But I got to tell you, emotions were running high for me in a bit of anger last night too. And so that, in a way, we try and be as objective as possible on this show. That's just kind of our focus on the show. Obviously, we cover the team. We are fans of the team. We attend games and all this kind of stuff. But, last night there were some things I saw and heard from a lot of different people that were pretty angering to me. One of which was at the end after the game. We obviously didn't know the extent of the injury, and you see the Thursday night football crew: Richard Sherman, Andrew Whitworth, Carissa Thompson. I mean, the whole crew's there, and there's a contingent of Ravens fans, and I don't want to guilt all of them by association, but there was a contingent of Ravens fans that were there that were yelling or chanting "F Joe Burrow" after the game when he's hurt. We had Glenn Martin on just a couple of days ago to help us preview. He's great. I know there's some kind of contention there, but it's all in good fun and all of that. He made a comment about Deshaun Watson on that. We kind of said, yeah, well, you said it, so we didn't have to, type of thing. There is a stark difference between the personalities, the backgrounds of those two quarterbacks, and when you have a fan base chanting that at the end of the game, as they did, no matter how big or small of the contingent of the fan base that represents, I have a problem with that. And so, I kind of want to start with that a little bit, just to say, man, that's just not a good look for a lot of Ravens fans. Now, maybe now they're walking that back a little bit, knowing the severity of things. But that coupled with some of the egregious calls all over the place by the officials last night. It was just a game where everything just felt out of control in so many different respects. And so even after the final whistle, things felt out of control. And so that's where, again, we talked about maybe not going live last night. And I think I especially just needed to kind of take a step back with all of this stuff coming out about that game.
Yeah, it was. I mean, after it happened, I think everyone was a little numb, and it's just like the game is happening. You're watching it happen, but it's like it's kind of in the background at this point. You're not really focused on it. You're just focused on when's the next piece of news that you're going to get that actually matters. Because I don't think anyone really believed that Jake Browning was going to command a win there. The AFC North is just. I mean, my main takeaway, because it wasn't obviously just Burrow who got injured. It's Thursday Night Football, which is already a very unnecessary, dangerous product and a dangerous game. You put two AFC North teams in that setting, and you're asking for disaster. And I don't even think I'm being biased here. It's just there's enough data at this point to support the fact that when two teams in this division play, there's just injuries that just happen more often than in other games. And now you add on the fact that there's less rest. And it's a recipe for just an absolute catastrophe. And there was 6 injuries, 2 of them that we know of are season ending. One of them is one of the best players on the Ravens roster from just, an unfortunate tackle that Logan Wilson made. That, yeah, it's like, it sucks because this is definitely avoidable. Don't have guys play on 100 hours rest, maybe to start. When teams from this division play, though, it's always a bloodbath. And I think the short rest just intensifies it. And that's how you get very bad games like this, where, yeah, you had players kind of falling left and right. You had Cam Taylor-Britt, who was recovering from a quad injury that he was on the injury report a couple weeks ago. He came up lame, he played 70 freaking snaps against Houston on Sunday. Now he's out there playing, a full game, running down the field against the Ravens.
Yep.
Comes up lame.
Yep.
Hill, non-contact injury. He played his most snaps against the Houston Texans on Sunday. Lamar Jackson with an ankle injury. Odell Beckham with a shoulder injury. Thursday Night Football is just greed from the NFL, and it sucks. And there's just so many cases from the Bengals and the NFL in general of just an increase in injuries and very severe injuries. And I think that was my main takeaway. Like, bad fans are going to be bad fans, especially against rival teams. I think there's especially a pettiness with the Ravens with Joe Burrow because of what happened a couple of years ago. Because maybe there's just, the Ravens the Bengals have had most of their success against the Ravens when Lamar Jackson wasn't out there. And then the tables kind of got turned because the Bengals had to play with their backup quarterback. I don't really know what the case is. There's obviously no explaining it. But I think my whole takeaway was it was just a bad situation to begin with. And then it was just AFC North football just being the worst.
I don't know what the fix is for that, because we all know, you mentioned the 5-letter word greed. Yeah, I mean, the only fix I can think of for Thursday Night Football is to not have such critical, high-profile divisional games on these slates. But then you potentially water down the product if you're just kind of doing these quote unquote exhibition games where it's, the Packers versus the Browns, or, it's just kind of the random matchup that pops up on a schedule every year. So I don't know what the fix is. I mean, the fix is to take it away, but that's not going to happen. So I'm in agreement with you. That's Thursday Night Football has long been, I mean, I like the fact that there's, a little extra excitement. There's a game kind of before all of the other games on the weekend, so to speak. But I don't know, man. I mean, we've seen it happen, and we've seen it happen with the Bengals. Geno Atkins had years ago when he was on a tear and the Bengals were having a pretty good year. He blew out his knee on, in one of these games. You got Joe Burrow on this one. I mean, a lot of teams lose a lot. Mark Andrews. I mean, the Ravens, that not only just to kind of sympathize for the Ravens a little bit, they just came off of a big divisional game Sunday against the Browns, and then they turn around and have the divisional game again on Thursday. And it's like, man, that is, that's hard on them too. And so they had guys go down with injury as well. But unfortunately, Joe Burrow is out with the wrist injury, tore ligament in there. I thought maybe it was, going to be a pretty bad sprain, and that was it today. Last night, I didn't have that feeling when he was trying to grip that football and he just couldn't do it. I should have known better. I thought, for those who don't know, I a while ago, you can see my battle scar. I actually tore my tricep tendon a couple of years ago, and I remember when I went to the doctor with it, and he was testing me. He was testing how much force I can put on different things at different angles and stuff. And I remember there was one where I just couldn't get any strength pushing back on his hand from a certain position where you utilize your tricep. And my mind today, just kind of personally speaking, went to that Joe Burrow aspect where he just couldn't. He probably didn't have any kind of strength or grip strength or anything, much less probably pain as well. But when you have a ligament pop like that, you just don't really have anything in there to give you the strength of the grip or anything like that.
So yeah, it's pretty obvious from all of that information that he's going to be out for the remainder of the season. It remains to be seen what the recovery time is in terms of when he can resume normal activities and everything of that nature. The other angle with this is obviously now a couple hours before the game, my dad calls me and he's just talking to me about the game, and he's talking to me about, well, so what's this thing with his wrist, this like sleeve on his wrist or something like that. I'm like, Dad, what the hell are you talking about? Because like we follow Bengals tweets and everything, and I didn't see anything from any of the reporters that I follow talking about some deleted footage of him coming off the plane. I only saw it, I think, maybe right before kickoff, because one of my editors, linked it to me in our Bengals chat for A to Z. But again, like I didn't think of it. Like I can barely really even see it. It's like way in the background. I have no idea what it is. I have no right to even speculate what it is. And then he suffers a wrist injury, and then the whole thing kind of goes up into flames, and everyone is speculating. You have Mike Florio calling on for Congress to investigate the NFL, and it's just like this thing is a little bit out of control. The Schwartz brothers went against Twitter. All of it seems like Jeff and Mitchell Schwartz, former NFL offensive lineman. Mitchell was especially adamant just about, if it's not an injury that prohibits you from practicing, if you don't have to have any official treatment from the team, then there is no obligation for the team to put you on the practice report. The caveat here is that obviously, even when Burrow had the calf injury, he was getting treatment during practice, and that's why he was listed as like a full participant. You see that all the time in the NFL with players who practice full. They still deal with injuries. They still get official treatment. If he was not on the injury report, then he would have gotten no treatment, and he was not prohibited at practice at all. And then, of course, we find out today when Burrow was speaking and Zach Taylor was speaking to the press that the sleeve that he was wearing on the plane had nothing to do with any type of wrist injury. Mitchell Schwartz even said it, I think last night. It was likely a sleeve that was worn on the plane to avoid swelling when you're in high altitude. And that's exactly what Burrow said it was. He had done this before. I think he did it when he was out in San Francisco as well. I think that's when he first was starting to wear a sleeve on the field of play. So again, like I don't think that has anything to do with a wrist injury that's slowly getting worse, and all of a sudden it strains. And on top of all of that, we have clear evidence of him landing on his wrist the play before. I don't know, his wrist tears, and that's when Jadeveon Clowney hit him on the pass before the touchdown pass, and all of a sudden he can't throw the football. So again, I'm really glad that we have all this information now before we start talking about it, because the speculation last night was just drastic, and I'm a little ashamed of it from some people.
Yeah, unbelievable. I think one of the things that comes out of this, I mean, a lot of people are saying season done and all this kind of stuff. I mean, that's the more likely scenario at this point, given how valuable Joe Burrow is to this team. But John, I also think this is going to be very interesting to see how not only how the Bengals respond, but there's a lot of talk, especially the critics or the rivals of the Bengals. Oh, Joe Burrow has all these weapons, and that's why this team is good. He's not that great, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to see firsthand just how much he carries this team, just how deep this roster is, just how talented this roster is over the next 7 games. We kind of touted the fact, hey, this is one of their best rosters they've had, and they've got a Super Bowl run in them. The stats in a lot of areas have not necessarily proven that point. And now you have your franchise quarterback out for the year. I know some people are excited about I mean, by the way, we're going to get to some questions here. We're going to be here for a little while. If you've got some questions, we're really going to kind of focus only on the chats this week for questions. So get them in that way. Super chats take precedent. The YouTube super chats take precedent, but we're going to try and get to a few of these as well. I know a lot of people are excited about Jake Browning in some ways to see what he can do. But I mean, to me, John, this is going to be a big litmus test for this team to see, okay, how deep is the rest of this team? How talented is the rest of this team? You know, how many games can they win without Joe Burrow? We know he's uber important to this franchise. Are they going to go over? Are they going to win a couple? Are they going to win more than we think? I think that's going to be a very interesting litmus test for this team over the next, month and a half.
The main problem is regardless who was a quarterback, they were already going to have the toughest remaining schedule out of any NFL teams, right? So you have 3 more AFC North teams, AFC North games. One of them is the next time that they play against the Steelers. You got the Jags, the Colts, the Vikings, if you want to call those two the weakest opponents, be my guest. The Chiefs, and then the Browns as well, who I guess they'll have a rookie DTR starting a quarterback. It's not going to be easy. You think back to 2020 when Brandon Allen was out there, they faced some not so good teams, and it was still a struggle. Obviously, the team was in a much worse situation than it was than it is right now. And obviously, you go back to the preseason when Browning was the quarterback for all of those reps, and he played with the starters, and it was not a great product. There was the conversation of how much worse would the team be with Jake Browning as quarterback for the first 4 weeks while Burrow was still getting his calf together. It's a lot of things going on. I think last night was about as good as you could expect Jake Browning to play for the rest of the season. A very average, okay game with some quality throws. I think he surprised even some people with some of the accuracy and the timing that he had. I think part of that is just being thrown into the game and the defense not really knowing what to expect. He got into a rhythm. Credit to the coaches for the calls that allowed him to do that. I think the run game also kind of helped him out as well, because they had some pretty decent success running the ball against the Ravens, which I think was a surprise to some people. Now it's him practicing all the time, him getting the reps with the ones for the first time, I guess, since August, and him just trying his best to elevate some of these weapons, because with T. Higgins already hurt, it was already a limited receiving core. I think he's going to lean heavy on Jamar Chase. It was kind of cool to because we don't see, the ball just getting thrown up to Jamar Chase in contested coverage down the field. And he tried that, and Jamar came down with it, but the throw was a little bit out of bounds. I don't know if we're just going to see that, many times a game just for the sake of trying to get something going. Yeah. But, at the end of the day, he's Jake Browning, and these are some very good teams that he's playing. It's going to take just phenomenal defense, obviously, and I would imagine a pretty consistent run game to support him as best as they can. Those are the obvious answers, but there's no reason to overthink this, I guess.
He also played a little bit better because I think the Ravens may have thought, hey, he's just going to turn his back and hand the ball off to Mixon the whole time, right? They didn't think they were going to let him throw probably as many throws as he did, even with the score being what it was. But, there were some throws. Even the one to Irwin that I thought it was kind of a catch, and then they ruled it incomplete. That was a good throw. There were a couple throws there we go, okay, wow. The other thing to remember on the plus side with Browning is, when we kind of say, well, he hasn't shown a ton in the preseason. There's been moments, but hasn't shown a ton. He hasn't been throwing the ball to T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, etc. He's been throwing to guys that are not on the roster. So he's got one, and playing behind a different offensive line that isn't as effective either. So there is a little bit more to be, I guess, optimistic about. I don't want to say excited, because there's nothing really exciting about this whole scenario, but I think there's something to be optimistic about with Browning in that sense. I want to talk about this, though, John. There's a couple of weird dichotomies with the Bengals right now as it goes with Joe Burrow. You have Joe Burrow. He's in his 4th year. You have a Super Bowl, an AFC championship, and depending on how the rest of this season goes, 2 top 10 picks. Those have been your just wildly, ridiculously opposite results for your season. Now, granted, the Bengals could still win some games and surprise some people here. We don't know, but they could be, if they lose out or don't win many games at all, they could be sniffing top 10 pick territory. To me, you have a franchise quarterback, and it's just a weird. If you look at it from a mile high view, it's just kind of like, man, that's weird how this has worked out. and kind of disappointing. Aside from that, John, I mean, there's been the knee, there's the wrist, there's of course the appendectomy that has nothing to do with really, football hits or taking hits, that sort of thing. But wasn't there a throat thing or a neck thing that he had at one point where he took a hit somewhere with that. He had the banged up pinky a couple games ago where he had a big gash on it. There's just a litany of injuries now. And what's coming into focus or coming into criticism from a lot of different fans, I'm seeing questions already in here, so I'm kind of blanket asking this thing. I mean, offensive line coach. I mean, Burrow style of play, he's going to take hits. That's just, we know that. But the amount of hits, the amount of sacks, the amount of big hits, something has to change. I don't know. I don't really know what it is. I don't know if they've invested so heavily in the offensive line, so it's hard to say personnel. It may be a combination of things, but he simply cannot take the amount of hits and sacks that he has taken in his career to this point. Otherwise, we're going to be doomed to kind of repeat this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I almost wonder if it's just like for the amount of ailments that he's incurred in his career, I still wonder if it's relatively not low, but it's like middling relative to the number of hits that he's taken because he's been hit so goddamn much. Obviously, when you are injured for the rest of the season, it's a pretty major one. That's happened twice now in 4 years, and both of them have come from hits that were allowed from the offensive line. So it's still a question worth asking. I think in general, I think a player can always bulk up a little bit more, and that may be something that might have to be the fix if the hits are not going to diminish. I think he's done a better job of just getting the ball out quicker to avoid some of those unnecessary hits. Him scrambling and running at, being a runner to try to get first downs like that, I don't think is going away, unfortunately. He's still not one for sliding.
It shouldn't.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
And a lot of the injuries don't really come from that. It's more just the hits that he takes in the pocket. And I think he's done a better job of minimizing them. Obviously, when you look at it from a macro scale, I can't even, it's probably close to, 3,000 dropbacks that he's taken now. And, like you said, you just listed off a laundry list of hits and dings that he's taken. So I would still say that relative to the number of hits, it's not like it's completely in the red, but you're right. Like at some point they do start to pile up and you do have to start asking the question. And I think the offensive line can always get better. And that's always something that they're going to be focusing on. And I think he's made enough strides where he's more, keen to get the ball out quickly, but sometimes bad hits happen and there's just no way to avoid it.
Yeah, I mean, this is another one from Mr. Generosity here, Mr. Whisper. What is going on with the offensive line? We're kind of talking about this. Is it scheme? Is it coaching? I know Wilson is replaceable, but why do you think Brown and Kappa are struggling in particular? We've kind of said, well, maybe that groin injury from a few weeks ago with Brown, maybe that's just lingering. A guy that I trust with his evaluation and his film review, shout out to Parker Blake. He has kind of said on some things on Twitter that he thinks this has kind of been a year-long issue with Brown in terms of just, kind of losing some leverage and stuff. And we've kind of noticed that a little bit too. There's been a couple of games where he's been, borderline dominant, but there's been a lot of other games where he's allowed a lot of pressures. He's one of, if not the top tackle and pressures allowed this year. So, I mean, there's an issue there. And then of course, Wilson, he's had some definitely not as many ups as downs. And then Kappa, who's been, a decent player, he's kind of had some struggles as well. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, again, it's just kind of like, well, I mean, do you change the style of play to the quarterback? Do you change the personnel? Do you change the offensive line coach again? I just have a problem looking at how successful Orlando Brown has been before getting to Cincinnati. Kappa was a solid player as well. Carousel. I mean, you've brought in guys who are solid and have shown on tape to be solid, but it still isn't consistent. There's still a lot of hits. There are still a lot of sacks, still a lot of pressures. It just might have to be, a lot of things changing. It's not maybe just one answer, kind of like you alluded to just a second ago.
these last two talking points, I think, can be summed up with one stark problem that the Bengals have. They have no athletes at offensive line, and this is a problem for a multitude of reasons. People wonder why maybe like Orlando Brown comes from the Chiefs and he's playing arguably his worst offensive line play in his career. Alex Kappa is having some very up and down games after he was pretty stable with Tampa. Ted Karras, has the occasional bad game, and obviously it's impossible to be perfect as an offensive lineman, but it's a lot easier when you are at best an average athlete at offensive line when you're surrounded by plus athletes who can just take a little bit of a load off of you, and then your assignments are a little bit easier. You're not being stressed as much, being put into space. When you have 5 of the same caliber of middling athletes against defensive line after defensive line who is just significantly more athletic than you, it is very hard to have consistent
That's a great
success.
point.
They are the most unathletic. They're the least athletic offensive line in the NFL. I don't even think it's close. They don't draft athletes very well. They don't sign athletes like Kappa, Karras, Collins, Brown. That they all have commonalities, and they don't really move very well. And the whole thing is like, okay, well they can sustain bull rushes too. Guys who are explosive, like they can get under your pads and they can displace you. Like you still need to be athletic. You still need to have some type of bounce to you in order to absorb power. So you take that, right? You take a very average at best offensive line in terms of overall athleticism, and the entire NFL is getting more and more and more athletic at pass rusher. We are in the we're in the golden age of pass rushers. DeMarcus Ware was talking about it a couple weeks ago, like the fact that Myles Garrett even exists after and it's not just him, obviously. It's Nick Bosa, it's Micah Parsons. Like these guys come in all different shapes and sizes, and quarterbacks are just under more and more duress, more than they've ever had before, which is why you're not only seeing Burrow get hurt, you're seeing, I think this is like 6 or 7 quarterbacks who are now out for the season. And I don't really foresee that getting any better until the weights or the balance kind of shifts back into the offensive line's favor. All the athletes are going to the defensive side of the ball, and you're not having as many athletic offensive linemen. They need to start investing in the offensive line in terms of athleticism if they ever hope to get ahead of this problem, because this is not just the Bengals problem, unfortunately. Unfortunately, though, for the Bengals, they are the worst at it.
So this is a question, and I just picked this one. There's been a couple about this. AJ, meaning McCarron, is our only shot to do anything. He should have won a playoff game already, meaning the 2015 wild card against the Steelers. And yes, that should have been a win for him, as ugly and everything that, whatever. And he started in the XFL and did great, in my opinion. But who am I other than a sad man? LOL. Thank you for the question there, Dalton. I guess it's more of a comment than a question. But, McCarron, his story in the XFL was awesome. And I think everybody, a lot of people in Bengals Nation have a little bit of a soft spot for him, and a lot of people will have a lot of what ifs about AJ McCarron. They saw what he did in college. They saw what he did in limited snaps and relief of Dalton in that crazy 2015 year. That, again, was a team that was absolutely stacked, that 2015 team. So he had talent around him on both sides of the ball. For me, I don't know that, AJ McCarron is our only hope, or, at this point, I think they're going to give Browning the shot, and he's going to get the first crack at it. And unless it's an absolute disaster, then you'll probably see AJ McCarron. Unfortunately at this point, I don't really know that. I don't like the term "the answer," but I don't know that either are really going to, right now as we sit here, I don't see either of them, hey, this is going to get this team to a winning record, maybe, sneak them into the wild card, that sort of thing at this point. Crazier things have happened. The Minnesota Vikings are a great example, John. Lost Kirk Cousins. He was playing well. The team started off real slow. Cousins was playing well. Now Josh Dobbs is potentially comeback player of the year at this point. Vikings are one of the hottest teams in the league with a backup quarterback. But, when it comes to McCarron, for me, it's all just kind of, well, I guess we'll have to see. I'm not sitting here, banging the table for AJ McCarron to start at this point.
Well, it's useless because, like you said, he's not going to get a chance unless Browning is just absolutely terrible, which is possible. anything can happen at this point. The Josh Dobbs effect probably has something to do with this as well, considering it's so fresh. But McCarron, yeah, I mean, that whole thing happened, 8 years ago? He was the second-year player. There was always the infatuation with him being a quote-unquote winner just because he played at a really good college and he had success as far as team success goes. People thought that he was underdrafted, and just the stark difference between maybe like the intangibles that he had compared to Andy Dalton, it just created the whole narrative that he should be able to take over and take the team to different heights. And obviously, he didn't last in the NFL as backup after I don't know, like 6 or so years. He's been bouncing around to other places, and he did well in the XFL. And back in March, like the Bengals didn't really have a solution to backup quarterback. I'm thinking, okay, if they bring in McCarron now and give him a full offseason to compete for that number 2 job, let's see what happens. But that didn't happen. He sat on his couch for the better part of the summer, coaching his kids' flag football team. Then they brought him in when they needed quarterback help because they lost Will Greer to the Patriots, and he's been on the practice squad ever since. But he's not going to get those reps over Jake Browning now, and he's not going to until, again, something happens to Jake Browning. That's very bad for the Bengals. So, yeah, it's a fun conversation because of the nostalgia and the infatuation people have with him, but it seems kind of pointless to me. I don't think it's going to happen unless something happens to Browning.
Yeah, and Mr. Whisper with another one earlier saying, I fully believe Jake Browning will succeed in giving us a high draft pick with a smiley face. We'll see what happens with that here. Other questions. I mean, I know there's a lot of talking points. The other thing I mentioned this, the stuff about the fans with the chant at the end of that game. The other thing that kind of stuck in my craw a little bit was, who was it? Roquan Smith at the end of the game, kind of saying, this is what happens when you play this defense type of thing. And I don't think he really meant like, we end your season, that's what we do type of thing. But it's just one of those comments where you go, I don't know, maybe read the situation, read the room a little bit here. And granted, there's a high level of passion and emotion that goes into a game like that, but there's just a lot of bad blood. And I think the Ravens players, maybe their fans as well, some are saying it and a lot of people aren't, but they're kind of saying, now Bengals fans, now you understand what it's like to not have your starting quarterback, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which I think is just still, again, not really the classiest of talking points. I mean, guy gets hurt, his season's done. The team's season is, I don't want to say it's over, but I mean, it's trending to not going to a good place. So I don't know. I think people just kind of need to read the situation a little bit better. And obviously we're a little more sensitive on this side of the fence with everything because it happened to the Bengals, but I don't know, man, there's just stuff that came across the wire last night and whatnot that I was just like, I don't know.
From my perspective, and this is going to change regardless, depending on who's actually speaking and what perspective it is. When the Bengals got good, it was a paradigm shift, and I don't think certain parts of Pittsburgh and Cleveland and Baltimore really appreciated the fact that the Bengals were the best team and they had arguably the best quarterback and the future was looking bright. So the first chance that they kind of fall back down to earth, it's stomp on the grave because things are kind of back to it's like where it used to be and where they're comfortable at. And I do think that has something to do with it. Again, it's very unprofessional. It's all just kind of how I read the situation. Obviously there are good people on all sides.
Right.
But like, no, it's stupid and weird to talk about because again, like what even are we talking about at the end of the day? But yeah, like I think the past 2 years have been very interesting for the dynamic of the division as a whole. And it's kind of now back to like, yeah, we're the top dog. And I think the mentalities that, the Steelers and the Ravens in general have always had, physical, hard-nosed, stuck in the 2000s, and some of that is not as tasteful as it is now in 2023. But it's still just, it reverberates in that building, and it's just a culture and a mindset, and it just is what it is. And I think for the most part, you just gotta let it roll off your back and just accept it for what it is and just be better than them. And, when the Bengals are healthy, they can compete with any team in this division. And more times than not in the past couple years, they've been better. So whatever.
Couple of things from the press conferences today. Zach Taylor mentioned that number one, this doesn't seem to be, which I guess is something to be optimistic about, this injury, its recovery and the surgery and everything associated with it for Joe Burrow does not appear to be something that's going to be, a lingering issue, no long-term issues. It should be just kind of repair and back to normal type of thing. Of course, when you're talking about throwing hand, throwing wrist, throwing arm, it's always a touch and go type of thing, but he kind of, according to the physicians who are going to be doing this and helping him with the surgery, the rehab, et cetera, it sounds like this isn't going to be a long-term lingering thing. The other thing he mentioned, and this was another one of those talking points that you talked about that just came across last night and into today, that Logan Wilson is quote unquote a dirty player because he was involved in 3 tackles last night that, were had injuries, right? It was Lamar had kind of an ankle tweak. Of course, the unfortunate Andrews tackle. And then what was it? The Odell Beckham one as well at the end of the game too. So there was a few there. I mean, none of which, I even looked again. I'm like, did he twist Lamar's ankle or something at the end? Like, what's happening here at the end of that tackle? No, nothing there. It's that one type of tackle that they're trying to eliminate from the game, but it is going to be incredibly difficult to, some guys fast and running down the field, you're going to chase them down and tackle them from behind. That's just kind of a natural body reaction in this sport to kind of grab, drag, and pull down. And unfortunately, that's been a big part. Well, it's been a part of the game where limbs and other stuff get tucked under a body as you're all tumbling to the ground. And so this narrative, and thankfully Zach Taylor took a moment to debunk any of that stuff. This narrative that Logan Wilson is dirty because of these hits is just ridiculous.
Yeah, again, this is it's always a weird subject because there's always going to be bias when you're talking about the players that you cover and that you follow. And me and you have talked plenty about questionable hits that have happened against the Bengals and maybe around the league and everything like that. But I think anyone can watch what Logan Wilson did last night and can only come away with just a coincidence. People who are mad at Logan Wilson, they're not really mad at Logan Wilson. Again, they're mad at Thursday Night Football. It's body blows that just accumulate with a lack of rest. Like with the Odell Beckham one, it's just like, first of all, Logan Wilson had no business actually making that tackle. He came from out of nowhere. And he was running faster than everyone, and he tackled the way that I think the NFL wants people to tackle compared to the hip drop. Because with the hip drop is when you start at the midsection, you kind of like lose all your footing and you just pull them down from like the hips, which is kind of what the name is. With Odell, he just ran through him, and he ran through him from behind, and there's just no other way for him to tackle him any safer. And what happened because, again, it's a dangerous freaking sport. And it's just like these things, they happen, and they happen more often than not when you're playing on short rest and the body blows are accumulating. It's crazy that he was involved in all 3. And again, if you wanted to villainize him for the hip drop, it's whatever. Like, I understand the whole thing with that. Like, maybe he could have done something different. But again, when you take away the target areas for correct reasons, might I add, you shouldn't be targeting the helmet. You shouldn't be targeting someone's legs, because that's what happened to Nick Chubb. It's just like these things kind of happen really fast, and it's like I don't know if it's the right thing to just like say you can't tackle someone at the mid waist. And it's crazy that all of them were involved with him. But I think anyone who watches Logan Wilson play consistently knows, like, he's one of the more sound tacklers in the NFL, and I don't think there's any malicious intent with the way that he plays.
So this is an interesting and loaded question here. It's 3 simple words from Dave Hammond, Pastor Dave Hammond, on our Facebook, Cincy Jungle Facebook page. Is Higgins gone? So that could mean a number of different things. I don't really know specifically what is meant here, but I'm going to tell you this, John. We could talk about this too. I'm going to tell you this. Aside from, heart going out to Joe Burrow, and man, you're doing, he's going through this stuff again and all this kind of stuff. I also kind of felt like, man, T. Higgins got a raw end of the deal this year and a contract year. Injuries for him, definitely not as severe as what Joe Burrow is experiencing, but injuries for him kept him out. The offense sucked for a month to start the year. And in fact, he was one of the only guys putting up touchdowns at the beginning of the year, oddly enough, against the Ravens. Missed time, and now his starting quarterback is out of the lineup. Now, granted, when he was a rookie and Burrow missed time, he ended up putting up some stats. I remember the Houston Texans game. He was lighting the game up. And that one with Brandon Allen, I don't know that we can definitely say that the same thing's going to happen here, particularly with other weapons now in the fold, Chase, et cetera. But I just feel really bad for him because this year has not gone the way it should have hopefully gone for him. I know a lot of people are saying, well, that means it's easier to keep in Cincinnati. That's a selfish standpoint. You should want the best for T. Higgins, regardless of if he ends up going with the Bengals or not. But this question, is he gone? He's not gone this year, if that's what I mean. He at least not right now. He probably will be back soon, I think. If this is about next year and beyond, I don't know. Maybe the Bengals again think to franchise tag him, and then maybe they also see where they are drafting and see what wide receivers are there in the range of where they are drafting, and maybe that's they kind of say, well, this is where we're going to go this route, and then we are, maybe we'll spend in free agency elsewhere instead of a franchise tag, a long-term contract for T. Higgins. I don't know.
This is kind of perfect because I'm really like murky and like cloudy, just like T. Higgins' future.
Yeah.
I know. I think this season for him, it almost becomes like the tag makes the most sense for both sides at this point. I don't see the Bengals like making a huge effort to bring him back right before free agency, just because that's harder to do. They haven't had a ton of success with players who are set to make the money that T. Higgins would make on the open market, and also B, just like I'm not sure what at this point what he wants. He might just want a fresh start just because of how awful this has been. But he's boys with Chase and Boyd, and I think this team and Burrow, and I think he's comfortable here in all those facets. The fact that I'm not entirely convinced too that. This is almost like contradictory to what I just said. I'm not entirely convinced that a down year for him this year is going to completely tank his value. I think at the end of the day, he's still going to be 25 years old. He's got a ton of pass production to his name. He's got 2 Super Bowl touchdowns. Like his resume is going to be extremely strong, regardless of how this year kind of ends for him. But I think obviously his market would be stronger if he was entering it on a high note, and we'll see what happens at the end. Like you said, he could have a solid end to the year. He's not going to eclipse 1,000 yards or anything like that. But I do think that the tag becomes more likely from both sides now because of how the situation is unfolded. It just comes down to, are the Bengals going to sacrifice $20 or so billion for 1 year for that?
Yeah. Any other questions you want to get to before we get out of here that you're seeing in the chat here, my friend?
I did. Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of talked about it, but Pick Your Battles Collecting was asking, he's worried about Joe Burrow becoming Andrew Luck 2.0. And this has been, I think, for as long as Burrow has been in the league behind a bad Bengals offensive line, this has been a concern. None of us are soothsayers. We have no idea how Joe Burrow is going to be feeling mentally 3-4 years down the road. I think Luck was like in his 8th year. He was about to start his 8th year when he made the surprise announcement to retire. I think the difference between Burrow and Luck, and I have just the most utmost respect for Andrew Luck. I think he's a phenomenal person. I think Burrow, in the most unprofessional way, has more of that dog in him. Like it's weird because I don't claim to know Andrew Luck. I have no idea how he was in the building and meetings and everything like that. I think Andrew Luck was wired a bit different compared to Joe Burrow, and I think Joe Burrow enjoys the physical aspects of football. Obviously, when injuries and recoveries and all that stuff they pile up, who knows what effect it has on a person. I don't see Burrow being the person to call it quits because of injuries piling up. I think he's accepted that as part of the game. And obviously, if things just continue to deteriorate and get worse, and his body is just breaking down completely before the age of like 32 or whatever, things can obviously change. But I don't get the indication now that it's going to head into that direction. And at some point, you have to think that the luck is going to turn. The pun intended, the luck is going to turn back into his favor. He's going to have a couple years without maybe a significant injury. But I've never really seen Burrow as someone who that could happen to. But obviously, it was a surprise with luck, anyways. So
yeah. You hope that's not where that goes, obviously. And, I do think also, if I remember correctly, and, I don't want to, this is just totally guy standing way far away from both of those two players and their families, etc. I think the Luck family and Andrew Luck kind of weren't they like involved in, they were like people of many talents, right? Like, weren't they doing different? Like, his dad was a football player and then like was involved in the NCAA maybe or something. And then they kind of have a lot of different interests, I guess. And not to say that Joe Burrow doesn't have a variety of interests outside of football. You just kind of felt like, well, I mean, and the way Luck carried himself, et cetera, it was just me. Well, maybe he's going to go do this after football. I don't know. I'm not expressing that very well, but I think, and I don't want to say that Luck wasn't about all about football, but I mean, I think there may be like what you said, that there may be a little bit more about football with Joe Burrow than maybe Andrew Luck, I guess, in a way. And maybe that changes from year 4 to year 8, though, also as the injuries pile up. So, again, that's not a knock on anybody. It's just, I think there's maybe, like you said, a little bit of a different personality and different dynamics going on there. But you hope that doesn't go that way for Joe. But the Bengals now, Joe is in recovery mode. Their team is in recovery mode. It's going to be very interesting to see how they bounce back, if they do, from this injury news that came out at the end of the week here. And, they've got a lot of things to think about, to assess. They've got a lot of, again, I think also, as we mentioned at the beginning, I think there's going to be a lot of things potentially exposed, areas of their roster, good and bad, with Burrow not being in the lineup. And so then at this point, you want to try and win games. You want to try and rally the troops and all of that, and maybe surprise some people and try and sneak into a wild card spot, depending on how things go. But you also need to assess how things are going, because he is your franchise quarterback. You just invested an insane amount of money in him, and you need to make sure that this is not a trend that continues with him. And you can put the injury-prone bug on him, label on him, if that's what blows your hair back or whatever. I'm not going to do that. I'm more into how do you prevent that. Do everything you can to prevent this from happening and protect your massive investment that you have in him, because this simply cannot continue. And the Bengals, their window opens, shuts in different areas, and it definitely shuts when he goes down with an injury.
Yeah, regardless of what happened or what would have happened with Burrow this year, they were going to have major questions about the offensive line in terms of a long-term perspective. They're going to have, contracts expiring with Karras and Kappa in the near future. Obviously, Jonah Williams is a free agent this year. They needed to have a complete reshift in how they invest in that position and how they evaluate that position. And that's obviously going to just pay dividends if they do it correctly. And I would say, for anyone who's like, what's the point of the season? Should they purposely tank, or should they try to get to the playoffs? To me, when situations like this happens, there's no real bad end result, because I think for a team that's composed like this and is built like this, it does no good to just purposely give up. Obviously, that's not going to happen. That's not what NFL teams do, aside from maybe one or two. So they're going to be trying. They're going to be still trying to put together wins. Wins are good for culture. They're good for just bringing new talent in here. That's not going to change. However, winning is going to be harder, and that's where the losses are just inevitably going to come. And that's going to lead to, obviously, a higher position, in the draft order and everything that kind of comes with that. So whether they win out, that's, I think, great for the morale of the team, or at least they have more wins than losses. It's just a great sign for the coaching staff, for the roster in general. People want to be here. They want to continue this thing when Burrow comes back. If the opposite happens and more losing happens, then it is what it is. They get a head start on the offseason, which has been new compared to the past couple of years. Again, they get a higher draft pick. And obviously there's the caveat of, they didn't have a quarterback, so that's why they lost. So I don't really see a negative end result with this. Whatever happens. But they're not going to intentionally tank, and if they lose, it's not because of that.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna start getting out of here, I think. Thank you everybody for tuning in. We've got a lot of live viewers on a lot of different platforms, a lot of comments and questions come our way. We appreciate it. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're new here, you can check out, hopefully you stick with us through the season despite the news that's coming through here. You can go subscribe to our YouTube channel underneath John there, and that Cincy Jungle icon. There is an orange and black Insider Show icon. Click that, click the subscribe button, click the bell to be notified when new content is available and when we go live, etc. And give a thumbs up to our videos if you like what we're doing. You can also get the videos on Cincy Jungle's Facebook page, so you got to give a thumbs up there. On the Twitter account, we stream live, so check that out. And if you like the audio side of things, our show and the others on Cincy Jungle, their podcast channel is available through your favorite audio streamer. So subscribe to that and leave a review, hopefully a 5-star one if you can. We appreciate that. Again, we appreciate all the support. John, thank you. I know it's Friday. I know it's tough to talk about this kind of stuff, but necessary evil. And hey, we'll get through it. And yeah, we're still here and talking about this season, but maybe keeping a little bit of an eye on next season as well and what the Bengals have ahead for them. For John, I am Anthony. We're going to get out of here. Have a good weekend, and we will talk to you soon. Talk some more Bengals with you. Take care.